A dog, the faithful guardian of his police officer owner, senses something profoundly wrong in a moment no one else noticed. Guided by instincts that transcend human understanding, the animal acts decisively to stop a man in a doctor's coat from making an irreparable mistake. The Belo Horizonte dawn brought with it a dampness that seeped through the cracks of the central hospital windows. In room 204, the silence was broken only by the monotonous beep of heart monitors and the soft hum of the air conditioner. Max, a Belgian Malinois with a fawn coat and watchful eyes, remained motionless beside the hospital bed. His flared nostrils picked up a scent that no human could ever perceive. Ana Oliveira lay still beneath the white sheets, her normally vibrant face now pale and serene. The officer, known for her courage on the streets of the capital, seemed strangely vulnerable, connected to a web of tubes and wires. The incident at Tancredo Neves International Airport remained a mystery to most. But for Max, who had been there through the entire operation, the memories were as vivid as open wounds. The dog's ears twitched, catching the sound of footsteps in the hallway. His instincts, honed by years of police training, kept him in a state of constant alert. He didn't understand complex human words, but his bond with Ana transcended language. Every beat of her heart, every subtle change in her breathing, these were signals Max interpreted with almost supernatural precision. A nurse entered silently, checked the monitors, and left with nothing more than a quick glance at the vigilant animal. Max relaxed for a moment, only to tense again as a new aroma invaded his sensitive nostrils. It was artificial, chemical, and dissonant in the hospital environment already heavy with the smell of antiseptics and medicine. Through the ajar door, a man in a white coat appeared, a clipboard in hand. His polished shoes made a soft sound against the vinyl floor. Max fixed his gaze on the stranger, feeling the hairs on his neck bristle. There was something in the way this supposed doctor moved, too cautious, too calculated, that triggered every one of the animal's warning senses. The man approached Anna's bed, checking the equipment with a practiced familiarity. As his fingers touched the IV line in the officer's arm, Max noticed a subtle shift in the chemical scent. It was stronger, closer. The dog felt his muscles tighten, preparing to act. The stranger's hand slid into his lab coat pocket, and the chemical smell intensified. Max didn't need to understand human intent to recognize a threat. His eyes never left those fingers, which now held something small and glinting, moving dangerously close to the tube connected to his owner's arm. Dr. Ricardo Costa, as his forged badge read, moved through the room with silent, almost feline steps. His pristine white coat contrasted with the dark expression on his face as he held a syringe filled with a clear liquid. The cold light from the monitors glinted off the needle, casting a sinister gleam that did not escape Max's watchful eyes. The Belgian Malinois, lying near Anna's bed, lifted his head instantly. His pointed ears stood erect like antennas, capturing the man's every move. Max's snout twitched, tasting the air. There was something wrong with that smell, a chemical mixture his police training had taught him to recognize as a threat. Ricardo approached the bed with a studied ease, as if he belonged there. He glanced at the heart monitor and, making sure no one else was in the room, prepared the syringe with a fluid motion. "Just a little something to help you rest," he murmured, more to himself than to the unconscious patient. Max felt every hair on his body stand on end. His muscles coiled beneath his fur, ready to spring. A low, almost inaudible growl began to vibrate in his throat. When the fake doctor reached for the IV port in Anna's arm, the dog shot forward like an arrow. In a calculated and precise motion, Max clamped his jaws around Ricardo's forearm. The force was enough to halt the movement, but controlled enough not to tear the flesh. The imposter's cry of pain echoed down the hall. The syringe clattered to the floor, its suspicious contents spilling across the white tiles. Max maintained his grip, his eyes locked on the man's, communicating a clear message. Do not come near her. Nurses rushed into the room, momentarily frozen by the sight of a police dog pinning a supposed doctor. A burly security guard followed, trying to make sense of the chaotic scene. "Get this animal off me!" Ricardo screamed, his face contorted with pain and rage. But Max, trained to protect his owner at any cost, did not loosen his bite. He only released when the guard managed to pin the man against the wall, and even then he remained in a defensive stance, his body coiled like a spring, ready to lunge again if necessary. Chaos consumed the room, with raised voices and contradictory orders. Amid the confusion, no one immediately noticed that the spilled liquid from the syringe was beginning to hauntly corrode the vinyl floor. It was definitely not ordinary medicine. Two security guards dragged Ricardo Costa out as he protested his innocence, claiming to be a legitimate doctor. Max remained on high alert. His fur bristled, his eyes fixed on the door where the imposter had disappeared. His nose constantly sampled the air, picking up chemical residues no human could detect. "Someone explain what just happened here," the head nurse demanded, looking suspiciously at the Belgian Malinois. A dog like this had no place in an intensive care unit. Medical staff gathered, trying to understand the animal's violent reaction. Some suggested Max be removed immediately. Others argued that the supposed doctor's behavior had been suspicious, but no one could explain why such a well-trained dog would attack a healthcare professional. From the hallway, Pedro Santos watched the scene with a racing heart. The officer, Ana's partner for 3 years, noticed the syringe lying near the bed. Discreetly, using a gloved hand, he collected it and examined the clear liquid still inside. A chill ran down his spine. This was no medicine. "You saved her life, didn't you, boy?" Pedro murmured to Max, who now rested his head on Ana Oliveira's motionless hand. The dog turned his head toward his owner's partner as if he understood perfectly. His intelligent eyes seemed to say, "We are in danger." Pedro carefully sealed the syringe in a plastic bag. He needed to have the contents analyzed, far from the prying eyes of the hospital. His investigator's mind was already racing through the possibilities. Who would want to harm Ana? What had she discovered during that operation at the airport that had put her life at risk? "I'm not leaving your side," the officer promised, both to Ana and to Max. A nurse approached, trying to de-escalate the situation. Security said the man's hospital ID wasn't valid. How did he even get in here? Pedro glanced at the security cameras in the hall. Someone had allowed that imposter to enter, which meant the threat could be coming from within the institution itself. While the medical team discussed security protocols, he made a quick call to Captain Roberto Silva, reporting the incident without revealing his deepest suspicions. Max never took his eyes off the door, as if he knew the danger had not yet passed. The dog's instinct had prevented a tragedy, but Pedro knew this was just the beginning of something much larger and much darker. Pedro strode through the hospital corridors with hurried steps, his mind a whirlwind of questions. Max's attack on the supposed doctor could not be a coincidence. The dog had years of training. He would never react without a reason. Determined to find answers, he sought out the one person who seemed to have no connection to the case, Dr. Lucia Mendez, a physician known for her unshakable ethics. "We need to check the records for this Ricardo," Pedro said as the doctor led him to a private office with access to the hospital's system. Lucia typed quickly, her sharp eyes scanning the screen. "That's strange," she said. "There is no Ricardo Costa on our medical staff. Not as a resident. Not even as a visitor." They exchanged a worried look. The doctor kept digging through the system, discovering that the ID badge the imposter used belonged to an employee who had been on leave for 3 months. Someone had forged the identification with frightening skill. "Whoever he is, he knows the hospital routine," Lucia commented, showing Pedro how the intruder's visit coincided with a shift change, a time when surveillance naturally slackened. Back in Ana Oliveira's room, Max remained vigilant. The Belgian Malinois sensed the tension in the air, catching the suspicious glances cast his way by the nurses. Lying beside the bed, he kept his ears pricked, scenting every person who entered the room. Meanwhile, outside, the city of Belo Horizonte continued its frenetic pace. Cars honked in congested traffic. People hurried under the hot sun, oblivious to the drama unfolding within the hospital's white walls. The normality of the outside world was a stark contrast to the silent hunt that had begun within. Pedro returned to the room with a determined look. He stroked Max's head, acknowledging the intelligence of the animal who had almost certainly saved his partner's life. "Good work, my friend," he whispered, looking at Ana, still unconscious. "We'll find out who's behind this." The officer knew he had to be careful. If someone had infiltrated the hospital so easily, it meant the threat was sophisticated and possibly had powerful connections. He would have to trust his instincts, and Max's, to navigate this dangerous territory. The dog, feeling Pedro's hand, looked up at the man with keen eyes. He didn't understand human words, but he understood the language of danger perfectly, and something told him this threat was far from over. He remained alert, ready to defend his owner at any cost. 48 hours had passed since the incident. The hospital had doubled its security, but a tense quiet lingered in the corridors. Max remained beside Anna's bed, his watchful eyes tracking every movement, his ears catching the slightest suspicious sound. In the dead of night, when only the beeping of monitors broke the silence, the dog's head shot up, his nostrils flared, catching a familiar scent, the same chemical trace he had detected on the fake doctor. He rose in an instant, the fur on his neck bristling. A man in a white uniform and holding a clipboard was walking down the hall with a studied casualness. To any ordinary observer, he was just another nurse making his nightly rounds. But to the Belgian Malinois trained to detect threats, this man carried the same dangerous odor. Max slipped out of the room without a sound. The imposter was approaching a restricted wing, typing a code into an electronic lock. He never finished the sequence. With a deep growl, the dog sprang forward in a precise motion, launching himself at the man's chest. The man fell backward heavily, his clipboard flying through the air. Max pinned him to the floor, teeth bared, preventing any attempt to escape. The commotion drew nurses and security guards, who ran to find the dog holding another intruder at bay. "He doesn't work here," shouted a night shift nurse, recognizing the unfamiliar face. Pedro Santos, who had been dozing in a nearby chair, came running, still groggy. Seeing the scene, he drew his weapon and took control. "Don't move," he ordered the invader, as Max held his ground, growling low. Dr. Lucia Mendez, summoned urgently, examined the contents of a syringe that had fallen from the imposter's pocket. Her eyes met Pedro's, a silent communication of grave concern. "This is going for immediate analysis," she said, carefully securing the evidence. The hospital director, finally convinced of the severity of the situation, authorized exceptional security measures. Additional cameras were installed, and entry to Anna's wing now required biometric identification. "That dog saved lives again," one of the guards remarked, watching Max, who, after the turmoil, calmly returned to his owner's room. Pedro stroked the animal's head, grateful for his unwavering loyalty. "Good work, partner," he murmured. The officer knew this was just the tip of something much larger, a conspiracy that, thanks to Max's instincts, the hospital administration could no longer ignore. Pedro Santos couldn't sleep. After 2 days of inexplicable incidents, his police mind refused to rest. Sitting in the hospital cafeteria, he watched people pass by, turning a pen over and over in his fingers. Something much bigger was happening here, and he had to find out what it was. "I can't trust anyone in the department until I understand what's going on," he murmured to himself. The officer knew he needed an ally, someone from outside the system. That's when he saw Dr. Lucia Mendez walking down the corridor, the one professional who truly seemed to understand Max's instincts. "Doctor, may we have a private word?" Pedro approached her discreetly. In a secluded room, he laid out his suspicions. Lucia listened intently, her eyes betraying a growing concern. "I've also noticed some strange behavior among the staff," the doctor confessed. "And the dog. He seems to sense things we can't." Together, they devised a plan. While the doctor would use her access to check the hospital's entry and exit logs, Pedro would analyze the security recordings. Max became a crucial part of their improvised operation, standing sentinel at Ana Oliveira's door. The Belgian shepherd was tireless, patrolling the doorway with alert ears and vigilant eyes. The animal meticulously scrutinized anyone who approached, sniffing the air with intensity. In the monitoring room, Pedro gained access to the recordings thanks to an old friend from the gym. As he reviewed the footage from the previous night, he noticed something disturbing. "This doesn't make any sense, Befin," he muttered, checking the timestamps. There was a discrepancy of nearly 15 minutes between the logs. One moment, the hallway was empty. The next, people were already moving about, with no transition whatsoever. The footage had been clearly manipulated. "Someone erased crucial parts of the recordings," Pedro said when he met with Lucia again. The doctor confirmed his suspicions with an equally alarming discovery. 2 access records had been deleted from the hospital system. "Whoever is behind this has access to the security systems and the medical records," she concluded. As they spoke, Pedro's phone vibrated. It was a message from Captain Roberto Silva, summoning him for an urgent meeting at the station. "I don't know who to trust," Pedro confessed, showing the message to Lucia. "Trust the dog," she replied, glancing at Max, who continued his tireless watch. "He seems to be the only one who truly knows who the enemy is." The 3rd day of hospitalization brought the moment that changed the course of the investigation. In the silent room, lit only by the faint light filtering through the blinds, Ana Oliveira showed the first signs of consciousness. Her eyelids fluttered slightly before opening, revealing disoriented eyes trying to make sense of her surroundings. Pedro Santos had been dozing in the armchair beside her when Max, with his keen senses, perceived the change in his owner's heartbeat. The Belgian shepherd let out a low whine, waking the officer, who immediately moved to the hospital bed. "Ana, can you hear me?" he asked, gently taking his partner's hand. The woman's dry lips moved with difficulty. Her voice emerged as a rough, almost inaudible whisper, but the words were clear enough to chill Pedro's blood. inside the police. The effort to pronounce those three words seemed to drain all of Anna's energy. Her eyes closed again, and she slipped back into unconsciousness, leaving Pedro paralyzed by the revelation. This wasn't just some criminal operation. The betrayal was coming from within their own ranks. Max moved closer, resting his muzzle near Anna's hand, which dangled from the bed. As her trembling fingers brushed against his fur, the dog remained perfectly still, as if he understood the gravity of the moment. His watchful eyes darted between his owner and the door, as if he already knew the danger was now closer than ever. Pedro walked to the window, watching the city move below. Who could be involved? Captain Roberto Silva, with his increasingly suspicious behavior? Other colleagues from the station? The feeling of being surrounded by invisible enemies made his stomach turn. Turning back to Max, he noted how the animal maintained his vigilant posture, even after days without proper rest. "You sensed it before any of us, didn't you, boy?" he murmured, stroking his fur. Dr. Lucia Mendez entered the room just then, carrying test results. Noticing Pedro's disturbed expression, she approached with concern. "She woke up," he informed her in a low voice. "For just a few seconds. She said it's inside the police." The doctor nodded gravely, understanding the implications. "We need to be even more careful now." Max, sensing the tension in the air, positioned himself firmly beside Anna's bed. His determination was palpable. The dog, trained to protect, seemed to understand that his loyalty was about to be tested like never before. The battle was just beginning, and now they knew the enemy was much closer than they had imagined. News of Ana Oliveira's momentary awakening spread like wildfire through the hospital corridors. Within hours, security around her room was reinforced with 2 uniformed officers at the door and additional cameras hastily installed. Pedro Santos remained vigilant, taking turns with other trusted colleagues, but something in Max's behavior indicated that the danger had not yet passed. The Belgian shepherd, lying beside his owner's bed, kept his ears in constant motion. His attentive eyes followed every person who entered the room. It was during the afternoon of the third day that the animal began to exhibit even more restless behavior, growling softly at nurses who had not previously aroused his suspicion. "He's been agitated since this morning," commented Dr. Lucia as she checked Anna's vitals. "Maybe we should pay attention to what he's trying to tell us." Pedro noticed 2 nurses in the hallway exchanging strange glances, whispering to each other as they watched the activity at the nursing station. The officer noted that one of them wore an ID badge that was slightly different from the others. The photo looked like it had been glued on, not printed like the rest. During the shift change, when the hallways were busier and the staff's attention was divided, 3 men dressed in hospital uniforms approached the room. Max immediately tensed into a position of high alert, the fur on his back bristling and a deep growl rumbling in his throat. "We're here to administer her medication," one of them announced, holding a tray of syringes. Before Pedro could question their presence, Max lunged with military precision, tackling the man leading the group. As he fell, a metallic object slipped from his hand and skittered across the cold hospital floor. Chaos erupted in the hallway. Nurses screamed, patients were startled, and the other 2 intruders tried to flee in the confusion. "Stop them!" Pedro shouted, drawing his weapon as the dog pinned the first man to the ground. Hospital security managed to detain one of the fugitives, while the third escaped down an emergency staircase. When Dr. Lucia examined the fallen object, she confirmed what they had all feared: a syringe containing a mixture of sedatives in a potentially fatal dose. "If it wasn't for Max," the doctor murmured, looking with admiration at the animal, who now returned to his post beside Ana, as if he fully understood the gravity of the situation he had just averted. Pedro stroked the dog's head as he watched the false nurses being handcuffed. "We need to get Ana out of here as soon as possible," he decided. "We don't know who else might be involved." Night fell over Belo Horizonte as the decision was made. Ana Oliveira had to be transferred immediately. The risk of a third attempt on her life was imminent, and the team improvised an escape plan that depended on absolute secrecy. Pedro Santos took the wheel of the ambulance, his eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the dimly lit road ahead. In the back, Dr. Lucia Mendez adjusted the medical equipment, monitoring the vitals of Ana, who, though still unconscious, seemed calmer with Max lying at her side. "We have a tail," Pedro muttered, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. A dark sedan was keeping a calculated distance, but its intentions were clear to anyone who knew the game. Max's ears perked up, his snout sniffing the air that seeped through the ambulance's cracks. The dog caught the same chemical scent he had detected before, the one that meant danger for his owner. Restless, the Malinois began to pace in the cramped space, his eyes fixed on the rear window. "He's sensing something," the doctor observed, noting the change in the animal's behavior. "Pedro, I think Max is trying to warn us." At that exact moment, the sedan accelerated sharply, pulling up alongside the ambulance. The driver, his face partially obscured, reached into his jacket. Max exploded in a desperate volley of barks, throwing himself against the partition separating him from the cab. The warning was instantaneous. Pedro floored the accelerator, sending the ambulance lurching forward. "Hold on!" he yelled to Lucia, executing a sharp right turn into a narrow, poorly lit side street. The pursuing vehicle tried to follow, but Pedro knew this area well. With practiced skill, he navigated the ambulance through a labyrinth of narrow streets and back alleys, where his years on patrol gave him the upper hand. "Did we lose them?" Lucia asked, holding on to keep from falling onto Ana during the tight turns. "For now," Pedro replied, sweat beading on his forehead. "But they'll be back. They're everywhere." Max finally calmed down, lying once more beside Ana. The dog rested his muzzle on the officer's arm, as if to offer reassurance. His watchful eyes remained vigilant, knowing that this escape was only the beginning. As the ambulance continued through back roads toward an isolated hospital, everyone's heart pounded. Adrenaline kept Pedro alert, Lucia focused, and Max in a constant state of readiness. The war had just begun, and on that dark Belo Horizonte night, Ana's life depended on the loyalty of a dog, the courage of a partner, and the determination of a doctor who had chosen the right side of the fight. The new hospital, in a remote neighborhood of Belo Horizonte, seemed like an impregnable fortress. Its white walls and silent corridors offered a false sense of security that was short-lived. Just 2 hours after the transfer, Max, with his damp and attentive nose, picked up that familiar scent. It was the same chemical odor he had detected before, as subtle as a whisper, but unmistakable to his heightened senses. The Belgian shepherd began to sniff insistently around the door of the room where Ana Oliveira rested. His keen eyes scanned every person who passed, every lab coat, every uniform. Pedro Santos noticed the animal's restlessness and exchanged a meaningful glance with Dr. Lucia Mendez. "He smells something," the officer murmured, moving closer to the dog. "It's the same behavior as before." The doctor nodded, adjusting the stethoscope around her neck. "We need to check who has access to this floor. We can't trust anyone." The two had become unlikely allies in this silent battle. While Ana fought to recover, They pored over the hospital's records. Pedro, using his police authority, gained access to the digital system, while the doctor used her expertise to interpret the medical data. It was Lucia who noticed the first anomaly. "Look at this," she said, pointing at the computer screen. "The history of administered medications doesn't match the prescriptions. And here, in the visitor logs, there are unexplained gaps in time." Pedro's brow furrowed as he recognized the gravity of the situation. Someone is manipulating the data, covering their tracks. While they investigated, Max remained on guard. The Malinois refused to move from the door, even when a nurse tried to take him for food. His instincts were on high alert, as if he knew the threat was far from over. In the security room, Pedro uncovered more disturbing evidence. Some video files had been corrupted, precisely during the times of shift changes. Others showed abrupt cuts, as if edited by a skilled hand. "This is professional work," he commented, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "It's not just anyone who could bypass a hospital system like this." Lucia looked out the window at the night falling over the city. "It means they know where we are, and they're probably already planning their next move." In the room, Max's ears suddenly shot up. His tense body signaled that something or someone was approaching. The battle for Anna's life was far from over, and the dog knew it better than any human in that hospital. The afternoon sun cast long shadows down the corridors of the second hospital as Pedro Santos walked cautiously, following Max, who was tracking a scent along the floor with grim determination. The dog seemed possessed by a certainty that humans couldn't comprehend, his paws silent against the cold floor of a little-used wing. "Where are you taking us, boy?" Pedro whispered, keeping a hand near his weapon. He watched as the animal paused occasionally, lifted his snout, and then resumed his path with renewed conviction. Max led them to a narrow hallway that ended at a service door. The dog clawed at the metal surface, looking back at Pedro with an imploring gaze. When the officer finally gave in and opened it, they found a small, seemingly abandoned cleaning supply closet. "What do we have here?" Pedro murmured, as Max sniffed insistently at a specific shelf. Pushing aside some cleaning products, the officer discovered a hospital ID badge that had fallen behind a bucket. Holding it up to the light, he immediately recognized the crude forgery. The photo didn't match the official standard, and the holographic seal was poorly applied. Next to the badge, a discarded surgical mask emanated a faint chemical odor that only Max's acute sense of smell could detect with precision. Pedro placed both items in a plastic bag, a shiver running down his spine. "Dr. Lucia needs to see this," he said to himself, patting Max's head in gratitude. Back in the room where Ana Oliveira rested, Pedro showed the evidence to the doctor. Lucia examined the items with a grave expression, confirming that the odor from the mask matched a chemical compound unlisted in any hospital registry. "This proves someone is infiltrating the hospital using false credentials," she concluded, adjusting her glasses. "And whatever is on this mask, it's not part of any medical protocol I know." Pedro sank heavily into the chair beside Anna's bed, the weight of responsibility bowing his shoulders. He knew that each new discovery pointed to a conspiracy deeply rooted within the police corporation itself. Without concrete proof linking the imposters to their handlers, any rash move could alert the true masterminds. Max, sensing the man's tension, padded over and rested his muzzle on his knee. The officer managed a faint smile, finding in the dog's attentive eyes the only certainty amidst the chaos. Max would never betray them. "You're our lighthouse in the darkness, partner," Pedro whispered, as night fell over the city, bringing with it the promise of new dangers and challenges. 3 weeks had passed since the initial attack. The hospital room, once a strange environment for Max, now felt like an extension of his own territory. The Belgian shepherd remained vigilant, sleeping only in short bursts, always positioned between the door and Ana Oliveira's bed. From the window, Pedro Santos watched the street traffic, trying to identify any suspicious patterns. His eyes burned with fatigue, but his determination never wavered. The arrival of Captain Roberto Silva had changed the security dynamic, supposedly for the better, but Pedro couldn't shake his instincts. "We need to reinforce the perimeter," Roberto said, gesturing to two newly arrived officers. "I want reports every 2 hours and ID checks for anyone entering this floor." The captain cast a long look at Max, who answered with a low growl. Pedro noted the immediate tension between them. "The dog stays," Pedro stated, leaving no room for discussion. Roberto adjusted his tie with a calculated motion. "No one is suggesting otherwise. We just need clear protocols." Dr. Lucia Mendez entered the room carrying a clipboard. Her tired eyes revealed sleepless nights, but her dedication remained unshaken. "The tests show improvement, but she still needs time," the doctor informed them, lowering her voice. "Have you found any leads on who's behind this?" Pedro shook his head, his gaze drifting to the captain, who was checking messages on his phone with an impenetrable expression. That night, as the hallway grew quieter, Max began to pace, restless. His fur bristled and his ears swiveled, signaling that something was wrong. Pedro, who had been dozing in a chair, woke instantly. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, his hand instinctively going to his weapon. Max fixed his gaze on the door, then at the windows, as if trying to communicate something only he could perceive. The officer checked the corridor, but found only the guard assigned by the captain. Still, something in the dog's behavior put him on high alert. Later, when Roberto returned for a nightly inspection, Max strategically positioned himself between the captain and Ana. His superior pretended not to notice, but the tension was palpable. "We need to discuss the next step," Roberto said. "We can't keep her here indefinitely." Pedro studied the captain's face, searching for any sign of his true intentions. His distrust grew with every passing hour, fueled by Max's instincts and the inconsistencies in the new procedures. All the while, Ana remained unconscious, oblivious to the silent battle being waged around her. And Max, though exhausted, stood firm in his mission. Every bark, every growl was a warning. The danger was closer than they imagined. The reenactment at Tancredo Neves International Airport was meticulously planned by Pedro Santos. Still frail, Ana Oliveira watched from a distance as Max walked beside the officer, sniffing every corner his owner had passed weeks before. The Belgian shepherd seemed agitated, his ears constantly twitching, catching sounds imperceptible to human ears. Suddenly, Max froze. His body tensed, his muzzle lifted, catching a familiar scent, the same chemical odor he had detected at the hospital. Without hesitation, the dog bolted towards a service corridor, dragging Pedro by the leash. "He's found something," Pedro shouted to the small team accompanying them. Following the animal through restricted access hallways, the group reached an abandoned storeroom at the back of the airport. The place was dimly lit and filled with stacked crates, seemingly unused for a long time. Max pulled insistently toward a specific corner where, hidden behind dusty boxes, Pedro discovered a set of medical equipment and several empty packages. "These are the same type of syringes we found on the fake doctor," the officer observed, carefully photographing each item. and these packages seem to have held some kind of chemical substance. Dr. Lucia Mendez, who was overseeing the operation, examined the labels with a worried expression. This isn't ordinary medication. These are components that, when combined, can simulate the symptoms of cardiac arrest without leaving a trace in conventional exams. A metallic clatter interrupted her analysis. Max spun around, growling at a shadow moving between the shelves. A man in an airport uniform was trying to slip away, carrying documents and an electronic device. "Freeze," Pedro ordered. But the suspect ignored him, sprinting for the exit. In a fluid motion, Max launched himself, tackling the fugitive with stunning precision. The impact sent the man sprawling, scattering papers across the floor. The dog held him down, growling menacingly until Pedro could cuff him. "Airport employee, huh? Interesting how you showed up just as we found this evidence," the officer commented, gathering the fallen documents. Among the papers were flight lists, schedules, and names, including Ana's. The man had been trying to destroy crucial evidence linking the criminal operation to the attack on the officer. "Max, you're incredible," Pedro murmured, stroking the dog's fur as other agents led the suspect away. The K9 looked at his owner's partner with intelligent eyes, as if he understood that each new discovery brought them closer to the truth Ana had been so desperate to reveal. The lab results left Pedro Santos in a state of shock. The syndicate wasn't just smuggling drugs through Tancredo Neves International Airport. They were transporting components for biological weapons, capable of causing a catastrophe in Belo Horizonte. The empty packages found in the storeroom contained traces of modified pathogens, substances Max had instinctively detected from the very beginning. "This is much bigger than we imagined," Pedro murmured, running a hand over his tired face as he showed the reports to Dr. Lucia Mendez. The doctor, accustomed to hospital emergencies, turned pale as she grasped the magnitude of the threat. "We can't trust anyone in the corporation now," she concluded, glancing at Max, who remained alert even after the exhaustive days. "If Captain Roberto is involved, any move we make through official channels will be monitored." Pedro nodded, securing the documents in a folder. He knew a place where they could hide temporarily, an industrial warehouse on the outskirts of Belo Horizonte, occasionally used for police tactical training, but abandoned for months due to budget cuts. Under the cold, starry sky, the trio moved discreetly to the location. Their vehicle was not a police car, but a plain sedan borrowed from a trusted friend of the doctor. Max was restless in the back seat, constantly sniffing the air as if he sensed they were being watched. The warehouse, with its metal walls and high windows, offered the necessary isolation. Pedro set up a makeshift operations center using empty crates, an old table, and a worn-out whiteboard. He began mapping the connections between the suspects, using the information they had gathered so far. Ana mentioned something about the police before she slipped back into the coma, the officer recalled, drawing lines between names and photos. "We need to find out who else is involved before they discover our whereabouts." Lucia organized a small medical station with the supplies she had managed to bring from the hospital. "If Ana wakes up again, we need to be ready to stabilize her and possibly move her here." Max circled the warehouse, inspecting every corner, every shadow. The dog seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, staying close to the humans who now represented his owner's only chance for justice. As the night wore on, the three remained in silence, each lost in thought. They were alone against a powerful criminal network, one that had infiltrated the very institutions meant to protect the public. The enemy was everywhere, and they had to be smarter to survive. The industrial warehouse on the outskirts of Belo Horizonte had become the team's improvised refuge. Max paced restlessly across the vast space, his paws making metallic echoes on the concrete floor. The Belgian shepherd showed clear signs of stress, ears pinned back, breathing rapid, and a slight tremor in his front legs. Pedro Santos watched the dog with concern. "He hasn't slept properly in days," he commented to Dr. Lucia Mendes, who was organizing medical supplies on a makeshift table. "It's incredible how he stays so alert, even when he's exhausted," she replied, admiring the animal's resilience. Suddenly, Max lifted his muzzle and began sniffing the air intensely. His instincts guided him to a set of stacked crates in the corner of the warehouse. The dog scratched at one of them insistently, letting out a low growl. Pedro approached cautiously. "What did you find, partner?" Opening the box, he discovered abandoned lab equipment. Max sniffed intensely at an empty vial, showing the same reaction he'd had at the hospital when the imposter had tried to inject Ana. "It's the same compound," Pedro concluded, placing the vial in a plastic bag. "We need to get this analyzed." As Max continued his search of the warehouse, the officer received an encrypted message on his phone. It was from a trusted contact within the force. The information confirmed his worst fears. Marcelo Ribeiro and Juliana Campos, two agents who worked directly with Captain Roberto Silva, were infiltrators for the criminal organization. "My God," Pedro murmured, his stomach sinking. He had trained with Marcelo for years. Juliana had been present at the airport on the day of the attack. Lucia noticed the change in his expression. "What is it?" "Confirmation of what we suspected. The infiltration runs deeper than we ever imagined," he replied, showing her the message. Max returned to their side, as if sensing the rising tension. The dog rested his head on Pedro's leg, offering silent comfort. "That explains how they were always one step ahead of us," the doctor said, running a hand through her hair nervously. Pedro stroked Max's head, drawing strength from the animal's loyalty. "Now we have names, evidence, and a plan. They won't be expecting us to know this much." A new determination settled over the group. The initial shock of betrayal gave way to a firm resolve. With Ana recovering in an improvised room, Max as their tireless sentinel, and the evidence mounting, the team knew they were closer than ever to dismantling the conspiracy. "Tomorrow we begin the counterattack," Pedro declared, while Max, despite his fatigue, remained vigilant, as if he understood every word. The tribute ceremony had been hastily organized in the auditorium of the Belo Horizonte Central Police Station. Ana Oliveira, still visibly frail, sat in the front row with Pedro Santos beside her. Max remained alert at his owner's feet, his pointed ears catching every suspicious movement in the crowded room. On stage, Captain Roberto Silva was giving a speech about bravery and dedication, words that sounded hollow to Pedro, who never took his eyes off his superior. His distrust grew with the captain's every rehearsed gesture. Dr. Lucia Mendes watched from a discreet corner, analyzing every unfamiliar face in the crowd. It was then that Max suddenly raised his head. His nostrils flared, picking up that same chemical odor he knew all too well. The Belgian shepherd fixed his gaze on a middle-aged man who was moving slowly between the rows, approaching the stage with a dark backpack in his hands. Without a moment's hesitation, Max shot forward like an arrow, ignoring Ana's calls. The animal leaped onto the stranger with military precision, knocking him to the floor with a dull thud. The backpack slid away as screams of panic filled the auditorium. Pedro reacted instantly, sprinting to the scene as the crowd scattered in terror. The officer subdued the man, while Max held an attack stance, growling menacingly. "Nobody touch the backpack," Pedro yelled, signaling for security to cordon off the area. The bomb squad arrived within minutes. The backpack's contents confirmed what Max had already known: an improvised device packed with chemicals similar to those found in the airport storeroom. It was powerful enough to have eliminated everyone in that room. Ana, supported by the doctor, watched the scene with a mixture of horror and gratitude. "How does he always know?" she asked in a trembling voice. "It's not just training," Dr. Lucia answered, awestruck. "It's something deeper, a connection that transcends our understanding." As the suspect was led away in handcuffs, Max returned to Anna's side, receiving a tight hug from the officer. The animal seemed to comprehend the gravity of what he had just prevented. Amidst the chaos, Pedro and Lucia exchanged worried glances. The botched assassination attempt left an unequivocal message. The conspiracy was still active, deeply embedded, and determined to silence Ana at any cost. "They won't stop," Pedro murmured, stroking Max's head in gratitude. The dog remained vigilant, as if he knew this battle was far from over. The conspiracy they were trying to dismantle had deep roots, its tentacles reaching far beyond what they could have ever imagined. The air in the makeshift command center, set up in an old industrial warehouse, was thick with tension and anticipation. Ana Oliveira, still pale, the marks of the attack still visible on her skin, sat on a cold metal chair. Max lay faithfully at her feet. The Belgian shepherd's eyes never left his owner, as if he feared she might vanish at any moment. "It was all planned from the beginning," Ana began, her voice weak but resolute. "I found documents at the airport. They prove the involvement of at least 5 officers from our own unit in a biological weapons trafficking scheme." Pedro Santos ran a hand through his hair, visibly shaken. The betrayal of colleagues he had once considered friends was a blow he could barely absorb. Dr. Lucia Mendes, who was monitoring Ana's vital signs, gestured for her not to overexert herself. "Captain Roberto is in this up to his neck," the officer continued, ignoring the medical advice. "He coordinates the entire operation at the airport. When he realized I was investigating on my own, he ordered my elimination." Max's ears twitched at the change in his owner's tone. The animal seemed to understand every word, every emotion that hung in the air. His wet nose gently touched Anna's hand, a silent offering of comfort. "They use international flights as cover," she explained, stroking the dog's head. "The substances are transported in special compartments, disguised as medical equipment. I have proof, stored in a safe place." Pedro moved closer, kneeling beside his partner. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I didn't know who to trust," she answered, her gaze a mixture of guilt and relief. "Not until Max showed me who the real enemies were." The doctor adjusted the IV drip in Anna's arm, her concern growing. "We need to move her to a safer location. They won't give up this easily." Pedro rose to his feet, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. Anna's revelation confirmed his worst fears. They were fighting the very institution they had sworn to defend. How could they face an enemy who knew their every move, who had access to privileged information and resources? His gaze met Max's. In the animal's eyes, he saw a steely resolve, a loyalty that transcended any human oath. The dog stood, as if answering a silent call, and pressed his muzzle into the officer's hand. "If this dog can identify imposters and save lives without saying a word," Pedro murmured, "then maybe we can win this fight, even outnumbered." Ana managed a faint smile. Max has always known who to trust. And now, more than ever, We need to trust each other. The explosion ripped through the silence of the night like a crack of thunder. The hospital shuddered on its foundations as the emergency evacuation plan, drafted by Pedro just hours before, was thrown into motion. Max was the first to react, his ears perking up, catching the distant roar before the walls even began to crack. "This way!" Pedro shouted, guiding the gurney where Ana was still recovering. Thick smoke flooded the corridors, blinding them, choking their lungs. Max pushed forward, his nose to the ground, sniffing out the safest path through the falling debris. The Belgian shepherd seemed to grasp the full gravity of the situation, staying a few feet ahead, an infallible guide in the growing darkness. Dr. Lucia followed close behind, pushing the gurney of a disoriented elderly man while trying to calm a young woman stumbling beside her. "Follow the dog," the doctor commanded, as a side corridor collapsed, blocking their intended route. The heat intensified with every second. Glass shattered around them, and the damaged sprinkler system shot out erratic jets of water that mixed with the smoke, creating a ghostly fog. "We're almost there," Pedro encouraged the group, as Max barked ahead, indicating an emergency exit partially blocked by a fallen door. The officer threw all his strength into prying it open, his muscles screaming as the twisted metal gave way. Ana, though weak, tried to sit up to help. "Stay down," Lucia ordered, her voice firm even amidst the chaos. "Max and Pedro know what they're doing." Just as they finally reached the parking lot, a final deafening groan announced the collapse of the hospital's east wing. Chunks of concrete and metal rained down. Max lunged, grabbing Pedro by the sleeve of his uniform and yanking him out of the impact zone with seconds to spare. Panting and covered in soot, they watched the flames consume what was left of the building. Their eyes met over the ruins, a single grim certainty forming in their minds. This was no accident. "They wanted to destroy the evidence," Ana murmured, her voice still thin. "And get rid of us for good." Pedro nodded, running a hand through Max's dust-caked fur. The dog remained on high alert, scanning the perimeter. "We're on our own now," the officer concluded, sharing a meaningful look with Lucia. The doctor checked the vital signs of the patients they'd rescued before facing her companions. With no hospital records, no official protection, they were ghosts. Max moved to Anna's side, resting his head on her hand. The officer smiled weakly, understanding that from now on, only their trust in each other could keep them alive. In a small, makeshift laboratory at the back of the industrial warehouse, Max rested, while 3 researchers from the Federal University of Minas Gerais watched his every move. The Belgian shepherd, though exhausted from weeks of constant vigilance, kept his ears pricked, his gaze fixed on the doorcom that separated the lab from the room where Ana Oliveira was recovering. "It's extraordinary," one of the scientists remarked, adjusting her glasses as she jotted down notes. "His olfactory abilities surpass any parameter we've ever documented in a working dog." Dr. Lucia Mendes, who had managed to bring the animal behavior specialists to their hideout, watched in fascination. She knew the bond between Max and his owner transcended standard police training. When Ana coughed in the next room, the dog would react instantly, even without a clear line of sight or sound. "It's not just his sense of smell," Lucia explained to the researchers. "There's an emotional connection that amplifies his senses. Max detected substances our hospital equipment couldn't even register." Pedro Santos entered the lab carrying a folder of documents. He had spent the last 3 days gathering evidence against the traitors in their ranks. His eyes betrayed sleepless nights, but his determination was unshaken. "We got the last witness statement," he announced, placing the file on the table. With this, we have enough to expose the entire network. The group gathered around the improvised table. Ana, still frail but resolute, joined them, leaning on a cane. Max immediately moved to her side, providing additional support. "We need to do this publicly," Ana asserted, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "If we go through internal channels, we'll be silenced again." Tension filled the air as they discussed the risks. Exposing the criminal network meant putting all of them in mortal danger, especially Ana, who had already survived 2 murder attempts. "I have contacts in the press," one of the researchers offered. "We can guarantee live coverage, which would make any attempt to silence you much more difficult." As they finalized the details, Max sniffed the air and moved towards a backpack one of the visitors had brought. The dog nudged it with his muzzle, barking insistently. Pedro, now conditioned to trust the animal's instincts, carefully opened it, finding a small listening device tucked inside. "Looks like our plan has already been leaked," he muttered, crushing the device. The group exchanged determined glances. There was no more time to waste. The operation had to be moved up, and each of them knew that from that moment on, their lives depended on the success of the mission, and on Max's extraordinary perception. The auditorium at the public security headquarters was packed. Months after her ordeal, Ana Oliveira finally took the stage, supported by Pedro Santos and Dr. Lucia Mendes. Max walked beside her, ever watchful. The Belgian Shepherd was about to receive an unprecedented honor for a police dog in Belo Horizonte, a medal for bravery in the act of saving human lives. Captain Roberto Silva, his uniform immaculate, delivered a glowing speech, though his eyes carefully avoided Ana's. The officer noted the detail but maintained her composure as she received her own commendation. When it was Max's turn, the audience rose in a standing ovation. It was then that the dog's ears went rigid. His muzzle lifted, catching a familiar scent, the same chemical odor he had detected so many times before. Max bolted from the stage, darting between the rows of chairs, ignoring his owner's calls. At the back of the auditorium, a man in a dark suit was discreetly opening a briefcase. Max didn't hesitate. He charged with precision, tackling the suspect and sending the briefcase tumbling to the floor. Its contents spilled out, a crude device filled with chemicals, designed to release a toxic gas during the ceremony. Security acted swiftly. Pedro, recognizing the dog's behavior, was already moving before anyone else understood what was happening. The doctor rushed to help people who had been knocked over in the confusion. "He saved us all again," Ana murmured, watching her canine partner with awe as the suspect was handcuffed. Hours later, back in her own home for the first time since the initial attack, Ana stroked Max's head as they watched the news. The operation had dismantled a significant part of the criminal network, but not all of it. The dog remained alert, as if he knew the mission wasn't truly over. "You feel it too, don't you?" the officer asked, sensing the animal's restlessness. "It's not over yet." Max responded with a deep, knowing look that seemed almost human in its understanding. He lay at Anna's feet, but kept his ears angled, listening. As his owner slept, he remained vigilant. On the nightstand, Anna's phone blinked with a new message. It was from Captain Silva. "We need to talk tomorrow. Alone." Max lifted his head, the phone's blue light reflecting in his eyes. He sniffed the air. For a dog like him, trained to protect, true loyalty meant never letting his guard down, even when everyone else believed the danger had passed. Because Max knew with an instinct no human could fully comprehend, that some threats never truly disappear. And as long as Ana was breathing, he would be there, her silent guardian against the shadows that still lurked.